Welcome back. So, today I'm going to walk you through my philosophy of cycling as well as our latest chapter, Cycling Essentials. Now, the chapter is a three-way effort between John Hellemans, Julie Dibbins, and myself. And we bring some unique experience to the topic in that we have done it in terms of getting really bike fit many different ways. We've raced many different events and different distances. And we've also coached the sport for cyclists and multi-sport athletes. So hopefully that gives you a broad perspective. And hopefully we did a good job explaining the different options and the way those options come together for you. So let's start by my philosophy. And what are we trying to do by using cycling? Now, the neat thing about cycling is the volume of cycling that we can do compared to other sports is virtually unlimited. We're going to be constrained by our schedule more than our biomechanics and other factors which bump into us in other sports. The other thing that we have with cycling is it's very easy for us to measure and control our intensity. So a lot of folks, when we start swimming or we start running, our effort pops right away. We don't have much of a green zone. Now with the bike, when we're riding on the flat, if we use those gears, we have the ability to control our effort quite accurately. And we can also measure that effort quite accurately. So the bike is a unique sport for us. And as we go through this, John raises some good questions. And I didn't want to get into it kind of going back and forth between John and me in the chapter, but I will in the video share some of my experiences and ideas to answer some of the interesting issues that John raises. So what's the goal of cycling when we first come to sport? So we're a new endurance athlete, and what are we seeking to achieve with our bike training? Well, simply put, we're trying to change our physiology. So more than kind of get better on the bike, we want to get better at converting food to velocity and make our bodies more efficient. So our body has metabolic flexibility with how it converts food to velocity. And the bike is a great place to do that. Now, if you've been running from a young age or swimming from a young age, odds are you're going to be relatively efficient at swimming and or running. But many of us come to endurance sport from no background, no endurance sport background. And the bike is a great place for us to change and modify our physiology. And you'll find a video series called My Metabolic Manifesto, as well as an article called My Metabolic Manifesto that I wrote that explains that first stage, that first athletic stage when you come to endurance sport, that transformation. So before you're trying to get fit in a specific sense, it's more about becoming metabolically fit in a very general sense. And the bike is a great way for you to achieve that outcome. Okay. And I give you a brief summary of that in the chapter, link up a few things for you to get through. Now, John talks about the need for specificity, and I agree completely with what he says. And that is, if you want to be good at something, you're going to have to do that specific something, whether it's swim, bike, run, multi-sport, strength training, whatever you're trying to get good at, you're going to need to do it in a specific, targeted sense. And this has to do with the mode of exercise as well as the intensity that you're seeking to race. And John explains that really well in the chapter. So where John and I differ is really the stage. So this physiological transformation I'm talking about is what happens before you're going to get more specific. Likewise, each year after your off season, you're going to return to a more general approach to using the bike rather than a specific approach to using the bike to improve your specific performance in a cycling sense or a time trial sense or whatever you're specifically targeting on the bike. And then Julie kind of brings it together in the chapter, and she came to triathlon from swimming. So she knows what it's like to be very focused on a single sport, and she loves to ride. And so what she says is, look, as we age and as we go through these different aspects of our lives and our athletic careers, there will be times when we can't put as much into our specific sport. And the bike and cross training is a way for us to get more volume, more work done without grinding ourselves down mentally. So she accepts the specificity argument, but she would say you'll get more work done overall with an athlete if you broaden it so that it's not the day in, day out grind. I'll give you an example. It's relatively easy for an elite or a top amateur to do, say, 10 hours of supplemental cycling a week if they have the time. If they're a single sport athlete and you put an extra 10 hours of easy running or 10 hours of easy swimming on top of their base program, you might burn that athlete out or bump into biomechanical limiters. And so the bike is a way to get more work done over time, with work being an important mechanism for improving and becoming better at, ultimately, velocity, generating velocity from food. So that was her kind of bringing it together. Also, she talks about the joy factor. And if you happen to be one of those athletes that loves riding, having a sport and an option that lifts you, lets you kind of increase your mojo while you're exercising. And it's not kind of beating you down mentally. And it can be a really nice supplemental mode of exercise in your program. All right. We get into a little bit of the physiology there for you. And then we give you some green zone workouts that you can use. Now, there's different types of athletes. With green zone, if it's easy and it feels easy and it's feeling like green zone, that subjective perception chart that John put together for us, that's good enough. Now, if you happen to be an athlete that likes some structure, or you're an athlete that skews one way or the other in terms of cadence, you're either a big grinder or you're like spinning really high all the time, then one of the things you can do in your green zone is put a little structure in there. And that's really what we wanted to give you, is some options and ideas for putting a little bit of structure into your green zone training. But the nice thing about that green zone training, it doesn't need a lot of structure, and you can give yourself a mental reset and a bit of a mental break just by going out and logging the time. So it's going to be the time that generates the adaptation with the green zone. Frequency, duration, work over time. And the bike responds really well to consistent volume. So bear that in mind. Then we get into tempo, as well as if you have a new first threshold, how can you test it and make sure that it's a real new threshold? That's a little case study I put in there for you. You know, I think I got fitter. What should I do? Well, it's a common question. I explain how you can address that. I give you some workouts to test. The idea being you test this new level before just dropping it into your program, and it lets you ramp in over a few weeks, lifting the work rate in your green zone training. Then we explain how to use tempo, both tempo from an intensity point of view, but also tempo combined with torque, meaning big gear work and higher forces going through the muscles. And then we get into something that I asked John to do, which is his favorite sessions for a 40K time trial. And John has had a lot of great 40K bike legs over the years within a triathlon. And I knew that he would have some favorite sessions that he uses to get ready. And I wanted to share those with you. So those are in there for you. Outdoor, indoor, flat race, hilly race. He gives you ideas to apply in your training. And then red zone. Progressions to raise the roof. Now, I like to keep it simple, and so we start with just a simple approach for you to do some hard Zone 5 training. It's a protocol that's kind of proven. You're not going to overdo it. You won't kind of wreck yourself if you follow what we explain. And then from that, I got Julie to explain an advanced protocol. And the advanced protocol, she has used it with athletes of all abilities, and she generally sees a 5 to 10% improvement in 5-minute power if you use Julie's protocol. However, it is a really tough protocol. So if you use it for yourself, use it with intent. Know that you really need this aspect, and also understand it's probably going to impair your ability to do other stuff in your week because it's quite intensive. It will require recovery from it, but it's very effective. And so Julie would recommend that you are an athlete that handles intensity well and actually needs this, has a need for it, rather than just thinking, all right, might be time just to hammer myself. But it works really well. And we lay out the specific progression for you. There's a 5-minute test, a series of workouts, a kind of adaptation week where you let yourself absorb it, and then you repeat the 5-minute test. And you should be looking for a 5 to 10 minute improvement. Now, with the tempo workout, the torque workout, and the red zone workouts, all of those, with the rest intervals, you may be able to go more intensely than we outline. My recommendation, don't do that. These sessions are challenging, and if you do them harder than the way we outline, your recovery is going to be extended, and it's going to be a little bit counterproductive. So these sessions will give you what you need if you do them as instructed. If your recovery is prolonged, if it's really dragging out multiple days, or you find yourself going stale, you need to cut the dose down, and you might need to reduce your targets as well. If you're new to this type of training, in the text, in the explanations, I explain how to adjust. So for some of the progressions, I want you to reduce the time, the interval time. And for other ones, I want you to keep the duration, but I want you to reduce the number of intervals. I explain how to do that in the text. So look for that. Now, at the end of the chapter, what's it going to take? So it really depends on your goals, what you're trying to achieve with your overall fitness and your overall performance. So I started bringing it back to chapter 1. And what did we say in chapter 1? Well, we said the baseline that we want to be shooting for is an overall average of 2 hours a day for 5 days, 1 hour a day for the other 2 days. So that's 12 hours that you got to work with. Now, if you're a cyclist, that's going to give you about 10 hours of cycling, 2 hours of everything else. And that's going to be enough to progress and to move things. If you're not at that level yet, I would encourage you to go easier and get control of your schedule and move up to that level, that kind of 12 hours per week average every week. And I outline that in chapter 1 for you, how you can break it down. Now, same thing. That same 12 hours for a multi-sporter is going to give you a consistent 5 to 7 hours a week of cycling, depending on your training mix. And then from time to time, you may lift the volume, you may go down, but you're going to end up with about that 12 hours a week. Now, that's going to put you at a relatively low volume of cycling compared to the people that are going fast in your category. So how to compete? Well, what I recommend you consider is a focus block. And a focus block is 3 to 5 days where you're just going to increase the amount you ride, the duration. It's going to be mainly green zone volume because that's going to be the main thing that you're lacking relative to your near competition. And it won't be that disruptive to your life. And you can do these once a month and it will give you a boost without disrupting your life. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, let's say you want to be a competitive amateur. So you want to do get towards the level up in terms of your category if you're a bike racer, or level up in terms of where you are in the field if you're a multi-sport athlete. So let's start with cyclists. You're going to need to ride 5 to 6 times a week, and we recommend you shoot for about 12 hours of cycling across those rides. And I want you to do that for 6 weeks and just see what happens. Does your life stay in balance? Because sometimes when we increase the volume, things start to fall apart. And it can be as simple as just a couple extra hours, a couple extra sessions every week. Everything was going fine. We try and do more, just in terms of time allocation, and the week starts to fall apart. So 6 weeks, 5 to 6 rides, 12 hours of cycling. See how it goes. If you absorb that and your life stays together, then you can start adding in the other pieces of the puzzle. What are the other pieces? We lay them out for you up there. Tempo, torque workout, little bit of red zone workout, a long ride, and you're going to be able to put a basic cycling week into this overall block of volume. Round numbers, about 12 hours. Now, training load is going to be generated by the interaction between volume and intensity. And this is important to remember. You don't want to have more than 2 stressful days a week. And I think one of the things that the polarized discussion misses, polarized training, is kind of 80-20 between some people think it's easy and hard. And Steven Saylor's done a good job of refining that. And now he talks more about stressful days and not stressful days. So what you want to be thinking about within your week, your cycling week, is you're going to have 2 days that are going to be stressful. So what that means for most of us is it's going to be the long ride day, because we're going to be pushing duration. And then it's going to be our peppy day. And our peppy day will be either a tempo workout or a torque workout or a red zone type workout. Now, if you're a multi-sporter and you're applying and you're listening to this advice, one of the things you need to watch for is you don't try and mix your stressful days and end up with 4 or 5 stressful days. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, you're going to want to do a tempo swim and a hard bike and a hard run, and then you want to do a long run, you want to do a long ride and a long swim, and then you're thinking you want to do some sprints as well in one or more sports. It's easy to end up with 5 days that are stressful, and you're not going to get optimal results from doing that. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to shrink down the doses, and you'll also need to balance what you're doing between the weeks so that you're not giving yourself too many stressful days. So what that might mean is there might be a week where there is nothing hard in terms of your bike workout. You might have something that's challenging for the swim or something that's challenging for the run, and there could be periods of time where you're using the bike to develop your metabolic fitness, where you might actually not be doing much hard stuff on the bike at all, because your run and your swim might be handling that hard part of your program for yourself. So bear that in mind. It's a common challenge for multi-sport athletes, is overloading themselves with too many days that are stressful. So you're overloading with stress. In there, we recreate John's table from the Competitive Amateur. That's out of our Basic Week series, which is available on the website. And you can have a look at that. If you're a single sport cyclist or a multi-sport cyclist with competitive aspirations, look right down that bike column, and that'll give you an idea of the sort of volume. And then the supplemental volume that you would put in as a single sporter would go on top of those key workouts that you can see in there. Now, ultimately, I asked Julie, because she works, I've got my own experience as basically, I started out as a no-holds-barred amateur. And I said to Julie, I said, hey, let's say somebody comes to you and they're like, I want to get as good as I can get. And what's it going to take? I will do whatever it takes in my schedule to open up time for you to put in training and to try and ramp up my cycling. And because I want to become a great cyclist. And what I called it the no holds barred approach. And we came to this consensus. Single sporters, it's 12 to 15 hours every week of cycling, with the bigger weeks closer to 20 hours. And this is for an amateur, it's not for an elite. Now, multi-sporters, it's not all that different for you. It ends up being 10 to 15 hours of baseline cycling volume, depending on your tolerance and your schedule. And that's going to be inside a week of 20 to 25 hours. So at that point, you're training pretty close to where a young elite might be training. It is a lot of volume, and it is a huge time commitment. So you want to make sure it's worth it in your larger life. You want to really know and desire this, because there will be a cost in your ability to do other things. So this time commitment beyond the level of most athletes, but we wanted to share that with you. I also want to make this point. The incremental load comes from the volume, and this is an important thing to remember. I think a lot of amateurs have the feeling that if they do more, they're going to do more of the hard stuff. That's not actually how it works. You're doing more, but you actually get the more from easy stuff. The more is almost exclusively zone 1. And if you follow me on Twitter, you look at my Instagram stories, I share my profile from time to time of what I'm actually doing. You can pull me up on Strava too and have a look, and you'll see the more comes from zone 1. It's an important thing to remember, because if you're doing more and the more is all tempo, you're going to run yourself down and fry yourself. So bear that in mind. The interval workouts that we've laid out above, they apply from mid-pack, competitive amateur, elites. It's the same sort of program. Now, what might change is because the relative break points, this first threshold and second threshold, are better trained in a more fit athlete, the work rate and the relative intensity of the tempo and the red zone training will be higher for a higher performing athlete. But the overall session structure, the minutes, the zone targets are going to be the same. So bear that one in mind. And then finally, what's the optimal plan? The optimal plan is the one that fits your life, that you enjoy, and that you can repeat for a very long time, because it takes a long time to get good. And these adaptations and these gains that we're going to give ourselves by cycling will continue for many years, particularly these green zone adaptations. So bear that in mind when you're kind of building your plan. It's like, okay, I got to come up with something that I can repeat for 1,000 days, 100 weeks. What is going to be repeatable and enjoyable? That's your plan. So don't backfit it in a sense. You go bottom up. This is the time I've got. I'm going to be super consistent within my time allocation. And occasionally, once a month or seasonally in the summer, or when I can, I'm going to do more. And my more is going to be green zone volume. And that's how I'm going to lift myself patiently over time. Now, I let John close the chapter because John has so much experience. He's been around since the start of triathlon, and he has seen a lot of case studies of athletes at many different levels, and he's worked with very good swimmers, very good runners who have wanted to come into cycling. So he's seen a lot. And so I felt that his experience deserved to close out the chapter. And he's got some interesting questions in here. Now, one of the things he's noticed is fewer cyclists use outside sports to develop. And he said, should they? Well, I don't know. One of the things I would say to answer that is, out of all the different sports available, with cycling, you can actually do 800 to 1,200 hours a year of volume, and there's not many other sports where you can actually do that much. Nordic skiing comes to mind, but I do know skiers that cycle as well. mainly because access to snow and for that supplemental volume. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, Johns rightly points out using cross-training. You want to be careful when you're using cross-training that it doesn't inhibit the adaptations you're trying to get with any sport. So whether you're a runner or a swimmer, a cyclist, if you're using supplemental volume, it needs to be supplemental. So don't let it generate much in the way of fatigue for your key sessions and your main sport. So keep it supplemental. And that's one of the things I like about the bike. It's easy to do the supplemental part if you're a runner. Now, his other point that he raises is in a triathlon, and he's got a couple observations. So swim background, he has found has been really useful for novice cyclists. And the reason being is I think they're used to doing work, and you get them out of the pool and they're like, this is great. I got a view. I can move around. It's the joy factor that Julie talks about with her transition from a swimmer to a multi-sport athlete. Now, one of the things he's found, though, is when you take a cyclist or a runner and you put them in the pool, you don't get that same kind of crossover, particularly some runners that they just struggle with the technical aspect of swimming. And I talked about that in last week's swim video, and I gave you some tips on that. Now, his second point there is runners tend to become good cyclists, but the opposite is not the case. In other words, cyclists don't necessarily become good runners, good cyclists. Now, something I would say, having gone from zero and become a pretty good runner myself, is I'm not sure those cyclists are running enough. And by enough at the beginning, I would mean frequently enough, easy enough. So they're probably they've been doing their cycling for many years. And like I said, it's a sport where it's relatively easy to be high volume. But running requires a long apprenticeship of frequent runs. And I think if we look at the actual volume in terms of hours that these cyclists who are trying to run achieve consistently, we may find that it's a small fraction of their total training. And the game to play, I would say, if you're a cyclist, is to build that up slowly over time. As you do that, you're not going to like what happens to your sprint, because as you build up the running and you're beating your legs up with all this eccentric loading, your legs get beat up and they don't function the same way on the bike. And you'll notice that particularly with your top end kind of getting chopped. Good news is over time, you will adapt. But being a multi-sport athlete that dropped my running when I was really fit and had a year where I focused on cycling, it was amazing what happened to my top end bike numbers. They really went up for me. And I was a very well-conditioned triathlete, so my run volume was not particularly high at the time when I dropped it, and my body was very used to the running. So that's something to bear in mind. I think a lot of cyclists who want to try and become good runners don't give it a long enough chance, and they don't necessarily like what happens to their cycling, so they drop it, so they don't do it long enough. Anyhow, that's my take on a few of those points for you. So just to sum up, what are the key things? I think if you're a new cyclist or a new endurance athlete, I recommend you focus on the metabolic side, the green zone side, changing your physiology. So don't worry so much about giving yourself big doses of these hard workouts. The time for that will come later. Now, if you're an experienced cyclist and an experienced athlete, key thing for you to bear in mind is more isn't better. So you do the workouts, these tougher sessions that we laid out for you, and you use them appropriately as we lined out, and the supplemental training is green zone volume. And I think you'll find that that will enable season to season, year to year progressions. If you're not improving, pause, think about what's going on. Is this a consistency issue? Is it a training mix issue? We lay out the sort of standard mix that you want to be looking for. If you don't fit the standard mix, either you're doing all easy stuff, or relatively speaking, you're doing low volume but relatively high intensity for most of it, then you might need to shift your approach. So thanks for listening. I hope this helps you improve your physiology and become a better cyclist. Thanks.